is religion? Does God exist? There are 4 proofs of the existence of God: argument from cause, argument from motion, argument from design, argument from the moral order. The effect has a real dependence on the cause in such a way that the effect would not be without the cause. That being we call God. Hello, welcome to the show, The Truth Unveiled. I am your host, Father John Okerelum. Today, we shall consider what religion is in general. What is religion? Religion comes from the Latin word religare, which means to bind. From this definition of the etymology of religion, we can see that religion is that bond that unites us back with God. To God, you might ask, does God exist? Yes, God exists, and the fact that God exists can be known by unaided reason, that is to say, by reason alone. There are 4 proofs of the existence of God. These proofs are ironclad and irrefutable. They are argument from cause, argument from motion, argument from design, argument from the moral order, and argument from history. Today we shall just take 2 of these arguments to show that we can know that God exists from reason alone. An argument from cause. As usual, we would proceed with a definition, for a definition signifies what a thing is. What's a cause? A cause is a principle to which follows the being of another. A principle to which follows the being of another. This other thing is known as the effect. The effect has a real dependence on the cause in such a way that the effect would not be without the cause. For instance, if you walk into a place and you see a car, you will be wondering, where did this car come from? Who made this car? If you have never seen a car before, you will look at it and that's the question that will immediately come to your mind. Now, when we look at the world all around us as intelligible creatures, the question comes to mind, where comes these things? You see all the beauty of the trees, the mountains, the animals, human beings, all of these things we see in nature. The question comes, from whence do these come? As we observe these things, we observe that they come and they go. A man is born today, a man is gone tomorrow. A tree grows today, a tree is gone tomorrow. So we notice that they are finite. That is to say, they don't have within themselves the sufficient reason of being. They are not the cause of their own existence. So we know they are existing. We know that. But we know that within themselves, they do not have what is called the sufficient reason for existing. And all around us, we see finite things, but we know they came from somewhere. Therefore, if we see finite things, and from finite things we have more finite things, these finite things, even if they were 1,000,000 in number, they cannot be infinite. They don't have within themselves the sufficient reason for existing. Then that leads the mind to some being that has in itself the sufficient reason for existing. It is a necessary being that is one eternal, and infinite. That being is the cause of all of these finite things, because you must get to a point where there is a being that is limitless, unlimited, a being from which all these things proceed. That being we call God, because the being that we call God is uncaused, but is the cause of every other thing. It must be one. It must have within itself its reason for being, that is, it is necessary. All things we find in the world are contingent, but the cause of all of these contingent things must be a necessary being. It is one and it is eternal, because if it were not one, or if it were not eternal, if it were there are two things that have within themselves sufficient reason for being, then let's use A and B. We would say A probably has something that B doesn't have. And if A has something that B doesn't have, and B has something that A doesn't have, then they are not infinite. They have certain limitations. So they are therefore finite. But this being that has within itself a sufficient reason of being and existing is only one. And that one being that is necessary, that is infinite, that has within itself all perfections, we call God. The second argument, which we shall take today from the four, is the argument from design. We'll now go back to the car which we saw. Upon seeing the car, when one investigates all that he finds in the car, he sees a harmony in the car. He then says to himself, this car, not only was it made by someone, but it was made by someone with an intellect, with intelligence, because I can see a purpose in the car. Or you walk into a farm or a bush, a forest, and you see an array of palm trees lined up in a beautiful orchard. What comes to your mind? Someone planted these, or some people planted it, because of the order you see in the orchard, the palm trees all lined up in a beautiful set. Your mind moves to the fact that this must have been done by someone, and someone with an intellect. In the same way, when we analyze all of these finite things, we see an end in them, the beauty, how they come to be, how they are formed, how they continue in a series. Cross-pollination and pollination in case of flowers. If you even study the human being, the complex nerves, skeletal system, the muscles, the brain, all of these bodily functions you see must be from some being that is intelligent. Design bespeaks a plan, and a plan bespeaks a designer. There cannot be a plan without a designer, and that designer we call God. Well, you might ask, in things we see, though they are beautiful, they are well ordered, we still see in them certain imperfections, or what we would call limitations. Yes, we see limitations in them, but the fact that we see limitations in them must be because the intelligent designer put that limitation in them, in order that there be a multiplicity of things to show forth his perfections. He puts certain limitations as he created them. Just like when you make a car, if you have a set purpose for the car, you put certain limitations and features that one car has that the other does not. And imagine your phone. One phone is better than the other because of certain limitations that the designer had in mind. However, the one who is able to cause these limitations must have in himself a fullness. He must be perfect for him to be able to create these things with their limitations. And this intelligent designer we call God. Yes, after having seen these arguments, you might be convinced that God exists. if you doubt that. But then some would say, yes, we know God exists, but he has created us and long forgotten us. This is known as the error of the deists. But is it true? Supposing you see a human being who gives birth to a child and leaves the child to fend for himself, what would happen to that child? Your answer is as good as mine. The child left to fend for himself would almost certainly die. Even amongst the animals, this is unheard of. When they give birth to their offspring, they make sure they nurture the offspring. You have this push, this inclination of the parents, of the mother, to be there for the child, the offspring, until the offspring grows to a certain age, and then he goes out to fend for himself. How then would you say that God, infinite in perfection, all of these perfections we find in humans, in animals, is found in an eminent degree in God? How then can you say he will create us with intelligence to know him, to know our end, and know the reason why he created us, and yet he would forsake us? That is even impossible, because if God removes his conserving power from us, we will go back to nothingness. So that is an absurd thing. As absurd as it would sound for a parent to forsake their child once born, or for the animal to forsake the young kitten or the young calf or whatever animal it is once born, so it is unthinkable to think that God has created us and has forsaken us. Having considered all of these things, the fact that God created us and that he hasn't forgotten us, but that he has an end for us, we see, therefore, that these arguments answer sufficiently any doubt any sincere mind might have with regards to the existence of God. And if God exists, and we know he does, we therefore ought to pay him due homage because of his supreme and singular excellence. But this is none other than religion, which, as we have said, is the bond that unites us to God. See you next time, same channel. This is the truth unveiled.